He was a war-hardened veteran who thought the battlefield was far behind him, until his German shepherd began growling at the snow beneath their back steps. What the dog unearthed wasn't a bone or a wire. It was the first clue to a secret buried deep under their home. The police would call it the strangest case in Buffalo's history. But for this soldier, it was a battle for his family's safety and his faith in God. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart. Please subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. The wind off Lake Erie sliced through Buffalo that morning, its breath carrying flecks of white that glittered in the pale sun. The snow lay thick over rooftops and fences, softening the hard edges of the old neighborhood. Jack Miller stood in the yard behind his house, breath fogging the air, a sledgehammer heavy in his gloved hands. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that bore the quiet geometry of a soldier. Square jaw, close-cropped brown hair touched with gray, and eyes the pale blue of winter skies. There was a steadiness in those eyes, the kind that came from years of learning to stay calm under fire. Jack had served 2 tours in Iraq as a combat engineer before returning home with a limp that flared up when the cold set in and a habit of scanning every horizon before taking a step forward. Civilian life had softened the edges but not erased them. He still woke early, still liked order, and still felt that vague ache of missing something he could not name. He surveyed the cracked concrete steps that led from the kitchen down to the yard. They'd shifted with frost and time, dangerous for little Lily, who loved to bound down them despite his warnings. The steps, like the rest of the house, had belonged to Uncle Howard, a stern, reclusive man whose voice had always carried the sharpness of command. When Howard passed 2 winters ago, he'd left Jack the house, saying only that it needed a man who understood discipline. At first, Jack had taken the words as a compliment. Now, standing before the sagging porch and creaking windows, he wondered if there had been a hidden meaning. Inside, the faint laughter of his family echoed through the kitchen window. Emily, his wife, was a woman of warmth and quiet grace, mid-30s, chestnut hair pulled into a loose braid, soft green eyes that could disarm any storm within him. She had met Jack at a veterans' charity event years ago and had seen through his stoicism to the wounded gentleness beneath. Her patience was what kept the house breathing. Their son Ethan, lanky and thoughtful, was 15, already talking about college, while 9-year-old Lily, all freckles and tangled curls, was sunlight personified. They were the anchors to his drifting thoughts, the proof that life after the military could still hold purpose. At Jack's side, Rex waited, a German shepherd with the kind of presence that drew attention even when he was still. 5 years old, coat a mix of black and tan brushed with silver, eyes amber and intelligent. Once a K-9 partner during Jack's deployment, Rex had been retired after an injury to his hind leg. The two shared the quiet understanding of those who'd seen too much and spoken too little. Jack had often said that Rex could read his pulse before he could read his own thoughts. He raised the sledgehammer and brought it down hard. The first strike cracked the top step. Fragments of ice and cement burst outward, dust rising like breath in the cold. Rex's ears twitched. Jack smiled faintly and said, "Don't look at me like that, buddy. You're off duty today." He swung again and again until sweat prickled beneath his coat despite the chill. The repetitive sound was strangely soothing, each blow a rhythm that silenced the noise in his head, the static of old memories, sandstorms, radio chatter, the metallic taste of fear. By noon, Emily called out from the doorway, urging him to eat something. He waved her off with a grin. "Almost done," he shouted, though his arms ached. She shook her head, smiled that small, patient smile, and disappeared inside. When the door closed, the yard felt suddenly too quiet. The only sound the crunch of his boots and the creak of branches overhead. He paused to rest, leaning on the shovel, and that's when he saw it. A black curve beneath the shattered step. At first, he thought it was a root poking through frozen soil. He knelt, brushed aside the slush, and frowned. The thing beneath wasn't wood. It was rubbery, smooth, and unnaturally straight. He pulled off his glove, touched it, a cable, thick and cold beneath his fingertips. "Rex," he murmured. The dog padded closer, nose twitching, breath misting the air. He sniffed the ground, circled once, then gave a short, low bark, the kind he used to signal something out of place. Jack's brows furrowed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I feel it too." He cleared more snow and dirt, exposing several inches of the cable. It was old, perhaps decades, yet the sheath looked intact, no sign of rot. It disappeared deeper under the steps toward the house. Jack's pulse quickened. He had seen plenty of wiring, in vehicles, in field outposts, in the makeshift camps overseas. But this was heavier, industrial, not something you'd find in a family home. He followed it with his eyes, then with his hands, uncovering another line that ran parallel. 2, then 3. The cold wind tugged at his collar as a thought stirred. What if Uncle Howard had buried something here? The man had always been secretive. As a boy, Jack had spent summers visiting, only to be warned away from the basement and attic. Howard would disappear for hours, emerging with the faint smell of solder and oil on his clothes. "Mind your own business, Jack." He'd bark whenever curiosity struck. A man's house keeps his history. Now that phrase echoed differently. Jack sat back on his heels, staring at the cables. For the first time that day, the yard felt unfamiliar, like the snow-covered ground concealed not just ice but memory itself. The winter light dimmed as clouds rolled in, the sun retreating behind gray veils. Rex whined softly, sensing the shift in his owner's mood. "It's fine, boy," Jack whispered, but the words lacked conviction. Something in his gut, the same instinct that had once saved him from an IED blast, warned that this wasn't ordinary. He reached for his flashlight from the toolbox, clicked it on, and shone the beam along the cables. They disappeared into the earth under the foundation of the house. The logical part of his mind argued for reason. Maybe old electrical lines from when Howard upgraded the place. Maybe security wiring. But another part, the soldier's part, whispered caution. Hidden lines meant hidden purpose. He remembered how Howard had refused to install internet, claiming he didn't trust the grid. Yet apparently he'd buried cables thick as a man's thumb under the house. Snow began to fall again, heavy flakes landing on Jack's shoulders, melting into dark patches on his coat. He sat there a long time, silent, Rex pressed against his side for warmth. The world around him felt suspended, only the whisper of snow and the low hum of questions in his head. Finally, he stood, brushed the dirt from his gloves, and stared at the dark line once more. "We'll check it tomorrow," he said quietly. "Let's not spook the others." As he walked back toward the porch, he felt the strange weight of unseen eyes, the eerie sensation of being watched though no one was there. He turned once, scanning the quiet yard, the skeletal trees, the white silence. Nothing. Only the faint impression of his own footprints and Rex's beside them, leading back to the house. But the unease lingered, curling deep in his chest like smoke refusing to fade. That night, As the wind howled and ice tapped against the windows, Jack lay awake beside Emily. Her breathing was steady, peaceful. Rex slept at the foot of the bed, paws twitching in dreams. Jack stared at the ceiling and thought of the cables beneath the steps, the way they branched like veins, the way they seemed to pulse even in stillness. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. That morning light would make sense of it all. But the longer he stared into the dark, the clearer his unease became. Something inside the house was waiting, something that had been there long before him, quiet and patient under layers of snow and silence. And for the first time since leaving the battlefield, Jack felt the old chill of danger rise again. Not the kind carried by guns or war, but the quiet kind that hides beneath ordinary life. Snow fell thick and silent that morning, turning the backyard into a pale desert of frost. Jack Miller's breath clouded the air as he tightened his coat and followed the path of the strange black cables he'd found beneath the steps the day before. The storm from Lake Erie had slowed overnight, but the wind still whispered across the frozen ground like a warning. Beside him trotted Rex, his German shepherd, a sturdy 5-year-old with a scar tracing his right flank, a souvenir from a deployment both he and Jack tried not to remember. The dog's coat shimmered in the faint light, thick enough to resist the cold, and his amber eyes scanned every drift of snow with the focus of a soldier on patrol. Jack trudged forward, boots crunching through the ice-crusted yard. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those cables coiling under the house like black veins. He'd promised himself not to get paranoid, but that instinct, the one the army had drilled into him for 10 years, kept whispering that nothing hidden is ever harmless. He needed answers. The cables had run too deep to ignore. The old wooden shed loomed ahead, leaning slightly as though time itself had pushed it off balance. Its boards were gray, weathered, and stripped bare by Buffalo's relentless winters. This shed had belonged to his late Uncle Howard, the man who'd left him the house. Jack had never liked going near it. Even as a boy, he'd sensed something cold about the place, though he couldn't explain why. Uncle Howard had been tall and bony, his skin like parchment, his voice dry as dust. He'd been a man of habit, coffee at 5, radio at 7, and silence by 9. The kind of man who could live surrounded by secrets and never flinch. Jack had inherited that same endurance, though his came from war, not loneliness. He stopped a few feet short of the shed and studied the ground. The snow near the structure was darker, the grass beneath thicker and strangely alive despite the frost. Rex noticed it first, ears pricking, nose pressed to the ground, his tail stiff. "What do you smell, boy?" Jack muttered. Rex gave a sharp bark, then started digging at the snow, paws flinging clumps aside with fierce determination. Jack dropped to his knees beside him, brushed away layers of ice until something hard struck his glove. Metal. He cleared the surface, revealing a flat steel plate the size of a cellar door, its edges rimmed with rust, the handle crusted with frozen mud. The sight made his pulse quicken. "Well, Howard," he murmured, "you really were full of surprises." The metal was cold enough to burn skin through the glove. He grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't move. Years of neglect had welded it shut. He fetched a crowbar from the shed, wedging it under the rim. Each grunt echoed in the frozen stillness. Finally, with a groan that sounded almost alive, the hatch yielded. A gust of stale air rose from the darkness below, heavy with the scent of damp metal and earth. Jack aimed his flashlight into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow set of metal rungs descending into a small chamber. Rex whined but didn't move closer. Jack hesitated for a moment, his soldier's instinct flaring, but curiosity outweighed fear. "Stay," he ordered softly, and began to climb down. The air grew colder with each step. The beam of light quivered slightly in his hand as he reached the floor. The room was no bigger than a storage closet, built of concrete with a low ceiling that forced him to crouch. Wires ran along the walls like veins, all converging toward a single metal box in the center. Dust clung to its surface, but its edges were clean, too clean, as though someone had wiped it recently. Jack crouched, running his fingers over the lid. It was sealed tight, but on one side, a small row of indicator lights blinked in sequence, soft, rhythmic, like the beat of a heart. His stomach tightened. Whatever this was, it was still running. He brushed away the dust to reveal faint markings on the metal casing, serial numbers, a manufacturer's stamp he didn't recognize, and faint scratches near the screws, as though someone had tried to open it before. He grabbed the crowbar again, hesitated, then forced the edge into the seam. The screech of metal on metal filled the small space, echoing through the hollow air. The lid popped loose with a sharp, metallic snap. Inside lay a cluster of hard drives and circuit boards arranged with military precision. Thick cables connected each one, and at the center sat a recording unit no larger than a shoebox. Its lights flickered steadily. Jack could hear it, a faint hum, the sound of something alive. He touched the casing. It vibrated under his palm. His breath caught. "Jesus," he whispered, backing away slightly. The chamber seemed to grow smaller around him. He remembered Uncle Howard's obsessive routines, his refusal to let Jack or anyone else into the basement, his muttered phrases about keeping watch. It clicked now. Howard hadn't been paranoid. He'd been guarding something. But why would a man like him need a surveillance system beneath his yard? Jack crouched again, tracing the cables back along the wall. They snaked upward through holes in the concrete, disappearing into the direction of the house. Every wire that pulsed beneath his fingertips made the same quiet promise. This isn't over. Above him, Rex barked sharply, his voice muffled by the snow. Jack looked up toward the open hatch. "Easy, boy," he called. But his heart was racing. He thought of Emily, of the kids playing in the living room, of how peaceful the house had seemed all these months. That peace now felt hollow. If these wires reached the house, what else did they touch? He reached for one of the cables, gripping it tightly. It was warm. Not hot, not electric, but faintly warm, as though energy flowed through it from somewhere unseen. That simple fact broke through his disbelief. The system wasn't just active, it was drawing power. From where? The grid? A battery? Something else entirely? Jack swallowed, forcing himself to stay rational. "You're a mechanic," he told himself under his breath. "Machines have logic." But logic felt small down here. Every inch of the place whispered that this wasn't about mechanics. It was about intention. Rex barked again, louder this time, claws scraping the hatch frame. Jack climbed the ladder back up, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. As his head rose above ground, he took one last look into the pit. The lights on the machine blinked once more. Steady, patient, almost as if watching him. He slammed the hatch shut and stood still, breath misting the air. Rex pressed against his leg, whining low. Jack knelt, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "Something's under us," he said softly, something your old training never covered. Rex's ears flicked, eyes locked on the shed as if expecting movement. Jack stayed there for a long time, the cold creeping into his bones. The snow fell thicker now, covering the edges of the hatch until it was just another patch of white in the yard. But in his mind, he could still see the lights, blinking like eyes that refused to close. He looked back toward the house, smoke curling from the chimney, the windows glowing warm gold against the gray sky. A normal home in every sense, except for what lay beneath. As he walked back toward the porch, the memory of his uncle's thin smile flashed through his mind. Howard had once said, "This place keeps its own watch." Jack had thought it was just an old man's superstition. Now he wasn't so sure. Inside, Emily greeted him with her usual calm, unaware of the cold secret buried in their backyard. Jack forced a smile, kissed her forehead, and said only, "Found something strange under the shed. Old wiring, maybe." She laughed, told him to wash up for dinner. He nodded but said nothing more. That night, when everyone slept and the storm thickened against the windows, Jack stood alone at the back door, staring toward the buried hatch. Somewhere under that blanket of snow, the machine was still alive, humming softly to itself, like a secret heartbeat that refused to die. The storm outside had quieted by nightfall, but inside the Miller home, silence carried a different kind of weight. Jack sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim bulb above him flickering as if it too shared his unease. The memory of the metal chamber beneath the shed pulsed in his mind like an echo that wouldn't fade. He had told Emily it was old wiring, but the lie sat in his chest like a stone. Rex lay near his feet, eyes half open, every muscle alert even in stillness. The dog's ears twitched at every creak of the house, at every sigh of wind against the glass. Jack reached down, rubbing the rough fur behind his ears. "You feel it too, huh?" he muttered. When the clock struck 11, he couldn't take it anymore. He stood, grabbed his flashlight, and moved through the darkened hallway. The wooden floors moaned softly beneath his weight. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of dust and old paint. He paused near the living room, heart hammering in a rhythm too fast for the calm of night. Emily and the kids were asleep upstairs. He wanted to keep it that way. This was something he needed to see alone. He started with the ceiling light above the couch. It had always given off a faint buzz that he'd dismissed before, but now that hum felt like a whisper. He unscrewed the frosted glass cover carefully. Dust rained down, and then he froze. Embedded along the rim, nearly invisible, was a small black lens no larger than the nail of his thumb. His stomach dropped. A camera. A wire thin as thread disappeared into the ceiling. He pulled back, staring up at the hole, the reality sinking in, slow and cold. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. His hands trembled as he replaced the cover, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the wind. Rex lifted his head, whining softly, his amber eyes fixed on his master's face as if to say, "You're not imagining this." Jack moved to the hallway vent next. The metal grill was dusty and slightly loose. He grabbed a screwdriver and pried it open. Behind the grate, his flashlight beam caught another glint of glass, another lens, another eye. He felt the back of his neck crawl as he realized what that meant. This wasn't just surveillance in the yard. The house itself was wired to watch them. He turned toward Ethan's room, hesitating at the door. His son's quiet breathing drifted through the wood, calm and oblivious. He opened the door slowly, stepping inside. The moonlight from the window fell across the teenager's desk, scattered with textbooks and a half-built model car. Jack's throat tightened at the innocence of it. The small, ordinary life he'd fought to build after years of war. He moved to the bookshelf near the corner, the one Ethan had built with him last summer. Running his hand along the back panel, he felt a small, circular indentation. He pressed it. The surface gave slightly. He pried it back just enough to shine his light inside. There it was again, a black lens, this one drilled, cleanly through the wood, positioned to look directly into the room. His pulse roared in his ears. He wanted to rip the whole wall apart, but one sound upstairs, a faint creak from Lily's room, snapped him back to caution. He crossed the hall, his steps slow, deliberate. Pushing open her door, he found the little girl fast asleep, her small frame curled under pink blankets patterned with stars. Her nightlight glowed softly beside her bed, casting gentle halos on the wall. Rex followed, nose twitching as if scenting something off. Jack bent closer to the nightlight. The design was shaped like a rabbit, its eyes two tiny holes that emitted a faint glow. But when he looked closer, the eyes weren't light bulbs. They were lenses. He yanked it from the wall, the plug sparking slightly, and turned it over. A wire trailed from the back into the socket plate. He felt the ground tilt beneath him. Someone had been watching his daughter sleep. Rex growled low, deep in his chest. Jack whispered, "Easy, boy." But his own voice shook. He gathered the nightlight, the screwdrivers, and the flashlight, moving from room to room now, methodically. The bathroom vent, wired. The kitchen smoke detector, wired. Even the motion light near the back door held a hidden camera tucked inside the housing. Every discovery chipped away at the illusion of safety he'd fought to protect for years. By 3 a.m., he sat surrounded by a small pile of devices on the living room table. Lenses, wires, broken plastic shells. Rex paced restlessly, tail low, head down, every bit of him mirroring his master's unease. Jack rubbed his temples, trying to steady his breathing. His training told him to assess, to think, to find patterns. The cables beneath the shed weren't random. They were part of this network, the veins of the system feeding data somewhere. The chamber wasn't dead. It was recording, maybe transmitting. He walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out. Across the street, half hidden behind a row of snow-laden birches, a dark sedan sat parked. Its windows were tinted black. He had seen it before, once on his way to the hardware store, another time idling near the corner of the street. He'd thought it belonged to a neighbor. Now his gut twisted with certainty. That car wasn't just parked, it was stationed. He felt the old instincts surge to life, his pulse slowing, senses sharpening. The same focus that had carried him through ambushes overseas now returned, whispering the same command. Observe before you act. He noted the tire marks in the snow, the faint heat haze from the exhaust. The car wasn't empty. Someone was inside, waiting. Jack backed away slowly, letting the curtain fall back into place. His mind raced. Could this be the government? A private company? Or someone with an obsession tied to Howard? He remembered the strange serial number etched into the machine under the shed. He had written it down. Maybe. Tomorrow he could look it up. But tonight, the weight of violation pressed too heavy to think straight. He turned off the flashlight and sat on the floor beside Rex. The dog rested his head on Jack's knee, eyes still fixed on the door. "We're not crazy," Jack whispered. "Something's been living in our walls, watching our lives." His voice cracked on the last word. For a long time, neither man nor dog moved. The only sound was the low hum of the furnace and the occasional tick of cooling metal from the radiator. The house seemed to listen, breathing softly around them. And somewhere outside, behind the sheen of falling snow, the dark sedan remained, its headlights off, its windows reflecting nothing. Jack stared into the dimness of his home, realizing that the war he thought he'd left behind might have followed him home. Not in bullets or explosions, but in silence, in circuits, in unseen eyes. And though the snow covered the world in white, nothing about this night felt pure anymore. By morning, the storm had deepened into a white curtain that blurred the world beyond the windows. Jack Miller stood by the kitchen sink, his reflection pale in the frost-glazed glass. He hadn't slept. The pile of dismantled cameras lay hidden beneath a tarp in the shed, but the images from the night before, those tiny black lenses staring out from vents and walls, wouldn't leave his mind. He sipped cold coffee, the taste metallic on his tongue. Emily entered quietly, still in her robe, her hair tangled from sleep. Her soft green eyes studied him for a long moment before she spoke. "You haven't been to bed." Her voice, usually calm and gentle, carried a tremor. Jack didn't answer at first. He had planned to keep it all from her, to spare her the panic. But there was no hiding the exhaustion in his face or the way his hands shook when he reached for the mug. Finally, he said, "Emily, there's something wrong with this house." When he told her, everything, from the cables beneath the steps to the cameras hidden in Lily's nightlight, her face drained of color. She sat down slowly, her hand covering her mouth. Emily was the sort of woman who met crises with quiet strength. As a teacher, she was used to storms of another kind: children's tears, parents' anger, life's small dramas. But this was different. "Jack," she whispered, "are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" He nodded, eyes hollow. "I saw them myself. There's more beneath the shed. Something's been recording us." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, like a flame catching, her composure hardened into resolve. "We're calling the police." Jack started to protest. His instincts screamed to keep quiet, to stay in control. Years of military discipline told him that once something left your hands, you couldn't control the outcome. "If we call them, this becomes a circus," he said. "What if it's nothing? What if it's some old system my uncle left behind?" Emily met his gaze, her voice steady but edged with steel. "Then they can tell us that. But if it's not, Jack, if it's what you think it is, then we're living inside someone else's nightmare." Her certainty cut through his hesitation. Within 10 minutes, she was on the phone with the local sheriff's department. Jack stood beside her, silent, while she explained in clear, deliberate tones that they had found a surveillance system embedded throughout their home. The dispatcher's tone shifted from confusion to concern. "Stay inside, ma'am," she said. "A patrol will be sent immediately." By the time the red and blue lights flickered through the snow, the storm had thickened into near whiteout conditions. Rex barked once, low and sharp, as two officers approached the porch. The lead officer introduced himself as Sergeant Paul Hargrove, a man in his late 40s with a square face, short gray hair, and a weary expression that spoke of too many winter calls. His uniform was dusted with snow, and his voice was calm but alert. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller, we got your call. Mind if we come in?" Jack nodded and led them inside. The warmth of the house seemed fragile now, like borrowed heat in a place that no longer felt like theirs. Hargrove's younger partner, Officer Dana Perez, followed. She was compact and sharp-eyed, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun beneath her cap, her gloved hands steady as she unpacked a small evidence kit. She couldn't have been more than 30, but her focus was clinical. No wasted movement, no nervous chatter. Jack showed them the devices he'd found. One by one, he laid them on the kitchen table. The nightlight camera, the hidden vent lens, the wires from the ceiling. Hargrove examined each, his brow tightening. "These aren't cheap toys," he muttered. "This is professional equipment. Who installed them?" Jack shook his head. "The house belonged to my uncle. He died 2 years ago. I inherited it." "And you just discovered this now?" "I was fixing the back steps, found cables buried in the ground, followed them to a hatch near the shed. There's a machine down there. Recording units, hard drives, everything's still running." Hargrove exchanged a glance with Perez, who was already photographing the evidence. "Show us," he said. The group trudged through the snow to the shed, the wind cutting at their faces. Jack lifted the metal hatch with effort, revealing the narrow descent into the cold chamber below. Hargrove leaned down, shining his flashlight into the space. His whistle echoed faintly. "Well, I'll be damned." Perez descended first, her boots clanging against the rungs. "Sir, this is live equipment," she called up. "There's power flow. Look at the insulation, old, but still functional." Hargrove followed, crouching to inspect the blinking machine. "Get forensics on this," he muttered into his radio. "We'll need data retrieval, possibly federal assistance." An hour later, a van from the county's technical unit arrived. 2 technicians in heavy coats and gloves, Miles O'Connor and Reggie Tan, both mid-30s, both carrying the air of men more comfortable with wires than people, set up floodlights around the shed. O'Connor, tall and red-bearded, handled the electronics, while Reggie, shorter and methodical, logged serial numbers into a tablet. "Looks like it's been running for years," O'Connor said, kneeling by the metal box. "This isn't a home system. This is industrial-grade surveillance. Data's looped through multiple drives. Whoever set this up wanted redundancy, no single point of failure." Emily stood a few feet away, arms wrapped tight around herself. The snow fell in heavy sheets, catching in her hair, but she didn't move. She looked as if she were seeing ghosts rise from the ground. Jack moved beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She leaned slightly into him, eyes unfocused. "Ma'am," Officer Perez said gently, "do you know if your uncle had any kind of business that would explain this?" Emily shook her head before Jack could answer. "Howard was strange," Jack said finally. "Paranoid, secretive. He barely talked to anyone. I thought he was just lonely." Hargrove's face was grave. "If he built this, he had help. No one rigs a system like this alone." When they finally powered down the machine, the silence that followed felt enormous. The technicians sealed the drives into evidence boxes and loaded them into the van. Inside the house, Perez and Hargrove took statements. Outside, the neighborhood had begun to stir, porch lights flickering on, shadows of curious neighbors peering through curtains. By midnight, the street was lined with police cars, their lights flashing against the snowfall like warnings in red and blue. Word had already spread. The Millers' quiet corner of Buffalo would not be quiet for long. When the last cruiser pulled away, Jack stood at the window watching the taillights fade into the blizzard. Emily came to stand beside him, her voice small. "Are we safe now?" Jack wanted to tell her yes. Instead, he said, "I don't know." Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and endless, covering every trace of the night's chaos. But beneath that white silence, Jack could still feel the hum of the machine that had been buried under their lives, as if the storm itself was trying to erase its secret too. Winter lingered in Buffalo long after the investigation ended. The snow that once made the neighborhood beautiful now felt heavy, like a shroud over buried secrets. Jack Miller stood in the yard one morning, breath misting in the air, staring at the spot where the hatch had been. It was sealed now, filled, welded, covered with concrete he'd poured himself. The once open wound of the earth was closed, but the scar remained, so did the silence. The police had taken the drives weeks ago. The system was dismantled, but no one could tell him who had built it, who had watched them, or why. Sergeant Hargrove had called twice with updates that offered little more than sympathy. The data was encrypted beyond local decryption tools. The case had been referred to state investigators. Jack had nodded and thanked him, though what he really wanted was a name, someone to blame. Emily tried to restore normalcy. She had always been resilient, but there was a new distance in her eyes now, a wariness she couldn't mask. She filled her days with schoolwork and the children, her laughter quieter, her movements more deliberate. At dinner, she smiled when she spoke, but her hands would sometimes tighten around her fork when the house creaked. Jack saw it all but said nothing. Words wouldn't fix what had been taken from them. He spent most of his time repairing the damage, literal and invisible. He rebuilt the back steps where the discovery had begun, pouring new concrete, leveling every surface with precision that bordered on obsession. He patched the holes where cameras had been found, sealing vents and rewiring the lighting system himself. His hands, rough and scarred, moved with mechanical focus. It was work that required no thought, and that was why he did it. Thought was dangerous now. Rex was never far. The German Shepherd had changed too. Once playful, he had become watchful, his movements slower, deliberate. When Jack hammered nails or carried lumber, Rex would sit nearby, tail curled over his paws, golden eyes fixed on the edges of the yard. Every now and then, the dog would lift his head, ears pricking toward a sound only he could hear. Jack trusted that instinct more than any alarm system. One afternoon, while Jack was reinforcing the door frames, Sergeant Hargrove returned. The man looked older than before, lines deeper around his eyes, the kind of face that carried the wear of years spent confronting things he could never fully understand. He wore a thick navy parka dusted with snow and carried a folder under one arm. "Got a minute, Jack?" Inside, Emily offered coffee, which he accepted with a polite nod. They sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Jack had once laid the evidence, the pile of stolen eyes. Hargrove flipped open the folder, revealing a few blurred photographs. "State investigators cracked part of the system," he began. "Most of the recordings were corrupted or fragmented, but they found timestamps, hundreds of them. The earliest dates go back almost 12 years. Jack frowned. "Before I owned the house." Hargrove nodded. "Your Uncle Howard installed the foundation of that network himself, but the system was modified later, updated. Someone had access after he died." Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "After," she whispered. "Yes. Data logs show remote syncing. Someone outside was receiving what the cameras recorded. We traced a few signal pings to a server in Virginia, but that's federal territory. We can't dig deeper without clearance." Jack's knuckles tightened around his mug. "So you're saying someone's been watching us even after Howard was gone?" Hargrove didn't answer directly. He closed the folder and looked Jack in the eye. Whoever it was, they knew what they were doing, and they didn't want to be found. His gaze softened. "For what it's worth, You did the right thing calling us. Most folks wouldn't have looked twice." After the officer left, Jack stood at the window for a long time, watching the patrol car fade into the white distance. The truth, that they might never know who had spied on them, felt heavier than any snow. Emily approached quietly, placing her hand on his arm. "You did everything you could," she said, though her voice trembled. He turned to her. "Everything I could isn't enough." That night, as the family slept, Jack sat by the window with Rex at his side. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, but his eyes were on the horizon. Across the street, the house that had once held the black sedan was dark. The car had vanished days ago. Still, part of him expected it to return, headlights cutting through the snow like judgment. A week later, Jack made a decision. Selling the house would have been easy, maybe even logical, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't surrender the place that had become both his home and his battlefield. Instead, he installed a new security system, modern, transparent, and entirely his. Every wire, every camera, every bolt was placed by his own hand. He even invited Liam O'Connor, a local tech specialist in his early 40s with unkempt brown hair and a calm, meticulous demeanor, to inspect the installation. Liam had once worked for a private security firm before retiring early after an injury left him partially deaf in one ear. His voice carried a measured tone, his movements deliberate, almost reverent toward technology. "You've got a good setup here," Liam said as he reviewed the new equipment. "Everything you need for peace of mind. Just remember, Jack, security is about trust. Don't let it turn into fear." Jack gave a faint smile. Trust has been expensive lately. Over the next few weeks, small fragments of normal life began to reappear. The children laughed again. Emily played piano on Sunday mornings, and Rex chased falling snowflakes across the yard. Yet, even in those peaceful moments, Jack could feel it, the quiet pulse beneath the walls, not from hidden cameras now, but from memory. The house would always carry it, a mark invisible to others but etched into him like a scar. One evening, as he finished sealing the last of the old wiring holes in the basement, Jack paused to catch his breath. The light bulb above him flickered once, briefly, before steadying. For a heartbeat, the faint hum of the new system blended with something else, a sound so soft he almost missed it, like a breath under the floorboards. Rex's head snapped up. The dog let out a low growl, tail stiff. Jack froze, flashlight trembling in his hand. He waited. The sound faded. Maybe the pipes, maybe nothing. He knelt beside Rex, whispering, "It's over, boy. It has to be." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. He rose, turned off the light, and climbed the stairs back into the warmth of the house. In the living room, the fire crackled softly, casting gold over Emily's face as she read by the hearth. The children slept upstairs, the dog settled beside the couch. Everything looked normal again. But when Jack glanced toward the ceiling, he imagined the faint outline of where one of the old cameras had been, the tiny screw holes now painted over. They were gone, yet not gone. Some scars don't heal. They just stop bleeding. In the end, Jack understood something deeper than fear or mystery, that sometimes, even through storms and silence, God leaves signs disguised as scars. The cables, the cameras, the broken trust, they weren't just shadows of human darkness, but reminders of how fragile peace can be, and how faith can rebuild what fear destroys. When the snow melted that spring, light poured through the cracks he once sealed in dread, and for the first time, he didn't see wounds, but miracles stitched in steel and hope. Maybe that's what grace really is. Not the absence of storms, but the strength to stand through them. The world watches, sometimes with cruel eyes, but heaven watches too. Not to judge, but to guard. And in every scar that life leaves behind, there's a quiet whisper. You are still being protected. So if this story touched your heart, share it. Maybe someone out there needs the reminder that faith still lives in ordinary houses, in ordinary hearts. Comment below where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories of faith, hope, and second chances. And may God's hand shelter your home from every unseen storm.